Imagine becoming famous overnight and then vanishing forever. This is the case of Graeme Thorne. It's one of those stories that starts with this incredible stroke of luck, but ends in a tragedy that would grip an entire nation and really pioneer a new era of crime solving. So, let's start at the beginning. This story kicks off with what should have been an absolute dream come true for the Thorne family. But this fortune, as we're about to see, came with a terrible, terrible curse.
Okay, so picture this. It's 1960. A salesman named Basil Thorne decides to buy a lottery ticket. Now, this wasn't just any lottery. It was a public initiative set up to help fund the construction of what would become a truly iconic landmark, the Sydney Opera House. On June 1st, Basil's ticket is drawn, and he wins the grand prize of £100,000, an absolutely life-altering sum, about $2 million today. The Thornes were instantly rich and, as they would soon find out, instantly famous.
Now, here's a detail that's really key to this whole story. Back then, it was totally normal for newspapers to publish the full name and home address of lottery winners. So while the family's celebrating, Basil's wife, Freda, she had this nagging fear. She was deeply concerned that this public announcement of their new wealth could make them a target. And tragically, her intuition was spot on. And that good fortune, well, it was tragically short-lived. Just 5 weeks after their big win, on July 7th, their 8-year-old son, Graeme, was abducted while walking to school. All that joy just turned into a nationwide panic. And then a month later, their absolute worst fears came true when Graeme's body was found. The dream had just completely unraveled into a nightmare. You can just imagine the shockwaves this sent across Australia. The hunt for Graeme's killer became this frantic, all-consuming effort. But it also kicked up this media firestorm that, well, it exposed some really deep tensions in society at the time.
So early on, an eyewitness comes forward. They claimed they saw Graeme getting into a blue Ford Custom Line. Just that one lead sparked this massive police effort. They tracked down and questioned the owner of every single one of those cars in the Sydney area. One of the people they talked to was a man named Stephen Bradley. He had an alibi, said he was moving house that day, wasn't even around, and, at the time, it seemed like they bought his story.
But with no clear suspect, something really disturbing started to happen in the public conversation. See, kidnapping for ransom, it was just considered a foreign crime, something un-Australian. And because of that, a lot of the mainstream newspapers started pointing the finger at immigrant communities, stirring up all this suspicion and fear against who they called new Australians.
And this created a huge divide in the media. On one side, you had the big newspapers, basically fueling this narrative of blame against immigrants. But on the other side, the foreign language press fought back. Italian papers like La Fiamma actually dedicated multiple issues to calling out what they saw as the irresponsibility of the Australian press, trying to defend their communities from these baseless accusations. So, the investigation is stalling, public pressure is just mounting and mounting, and the police, well, they turned to a new, pretty revolutionary ally. The hunt began for a witness, an invisible one. Science itself was about to step into the detective's shoes. Think about it for a second. There were no fingerprints, no confession, no one who could definitively say, I saw him do it. And this is a world before DNA testing. So how on earth could police connect a suspect to this crime with any certainty? Well, the answer was hiding in the tiniest of details. They started focusing on something called trace evidence. And what that is, it's these microscopic materials. We're talking fibers from a blanket, a tiny speck of dust, a single hair, stuff that gets transferred between a suspect, a victim, and a crime scene. These tiny clues, they act like silent witnesses, creating a link where it looks like none exists. When we think of forensics today, we probably picture these slick, high-tech labs from shows like CSI. But the reality, especially back then, was so different. This photo, it's from the 70s, but it really captures the vibe of that era. You've got a scientist here working on a slippery roof with no safety harness. This was just painstaking, sometimes even dangerous work, done with basic tools, but an incredible attention to detail. And wow, did that attention to detail pay off? Investigators uncovered this absolute treasure trove of microscopic evidence. They meticulously collected what most people would think is just nothing. Insignificant stuff from Graeme's body and the blanket he was wrapped in.
We're talking traces of unique pink mortar dust, certain kinds of soil, leaves from a pretty rare cypress pine, and even some dog hairs. On their own, they didn't mean much, but together, they were about to tell a story. And this is where we get the breakthrough. This is the moment where scientists took all those separate, tiny clues and started fitting them together, just like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. And the picture that started to form was clear, it was damning, and it was just undeniable. The work was so slow, so methodical. Every single piece of evidence was analyzed, it was categorized, it was compared. This wasn't some big eureka moment. It was this careful, patient process of building connections, one microscopic link at a time. The whole goal is to make the invisible visible. And the chain of evidence they forged, it was just incredible. First, investigators found that unique pink mortar dust on Graeme's clothes. Then, they found the exact same mortar at the home of Stephen Bradley. Remember him, the guy with the alibi? Turns out, he'd recently built a new wall. The link got even stronger when the botanical experts matched leaves found on the blanket to two very specific, very rare plants that were growing in, you guessed it, Stephen Bradley's garden. And the final piece? The dog hair. It was a perfect match to his Pekingese dog. Suddenly, the whole puzzle came together. The evidence put Graeme Thorne right there at Stephen Bradley's property. There was no denying it.
You see, the conviction of Stephen Bradley wasn't just the end of a murder trial. It was really the beginning of a whole new chapter in Australian legal history. The case's legacy, it goes so much further than just that courtroom.
The forensic case was just so strong, so airtight, that it left absolutely no room for reasonable doubt. Stephen Bradley was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison. He ended up dying behind bars in 1968. Justice, delivered by science, had finally been served.
And in the process, the Graeme Thorne case became one of the very first and most famous scientific crime stories in the public imagination. I mean, it fundamentally changed everything: how police investigated crimes, how lawyers argued their cases, and how all of us understood the power of forensic science. It was the real-life case that proved that even the tiniest piece of evidence, it could speak the truth. So why does a case from all the way back in 1960 still matter to us today? Well, because it really sits at the crossroads of so many things we still worry about. The dark side of sudden fame, the incredible power of the media to shape how we think, and the amazing ability of science to uncover the truth. It's a powerful reminder that even in our age of high-tech surveillance,